Standing at the bus stop on a January morning in 1974, 7:30, the snow coming down thick and steady, you'd been waiting 20 minutes already. Your feet were going numb in your boots, your breath coming out in clouds, and you were starting to realize something that would define your entire day. The bus wasn't coming, not today, maybe not for days. You'd check your watch again, look down the empty road where normally the number 47 would appear every 15 minutes like clockwork and see nothing. Just snow, falling heavier now, covering everything. No bus, no traffic, just you and a dozen other people at the stop, all coming to the same slow, awful realization. This wasn't unusual weather delaying things by 10 minutes. This was 1970s Britain in winter, when a few inches of snow could bring the entire public transport system to its knees, and if you needed to get somewhere, you'd be walking. However far it was, however long it took. Britain's buses in the 1970s were brilliant when conditions were normal. Reliable, frequent, affordable. For millions of people who didn't own cars, and that was most people, buses were everything. Your lifeline to work, to shops, to school, to anywhere beyond walking distance. The network ran like clockwork, drivers who knew their routes by heart, conductors who knew half their passengers by name. But snow was the enemy. Snow was the thing that revealed just how fragile the whole system was. A few inches, nothing by Scandinavian standards, and British buses simply stopped running. The vehicles themselves couldn't cope. Rear-wheel drive, minimal ground clearance, tyres that weren't equipped for ice. They'd slide, get stuck, block roads. So the bus companies did the only sensible thing. They cancelled the routes. You'd find out through word of mouth usually. Someone at the stop saying they'd heard the buses weren't running. Maybe a supervisor from the depot driving past in a van, shouting out the window that service was suspended until further notice. Sometimes you'd wait an hour before you knew for certain, before you accepted that you'd wasted all that time standing in the cold for nothing. The decision then was simple but brutal. Walk or don't go. And most people walked because they had to. Work didn't close because of snow. Schools stayed open. You had responsibilities, commitments, places you needed to be, and the fact that your bus wasn't running wasn't anyone's problem but yours. The walks were extraordinary. Not a quick 10-minute stroll to the corner shop. We're talking miles. 3 miles, 5 miles, some people walking 7 or 8 miles each way because there was no alternative. Roads that normally took 15 minutes by bus now took 2 hours on foot through snow that was often knee-deep in drifts. You'd see them starting out all across Britain that morning. Office workers in their suits and overcoats, trudging through snow that buried the pavements. Factory workers in their donkey jackets, walking in groups because there was safety in numbers, and shared misery made it bearable. Nurses and shop assistants and teachers, all walking distances they'd never normally consider, because staying home wasn't an option when people depended on you. The routes were obvious. You'd follow the bus route because you knew it, because it was the most direct way, because everyone else was doing the same. These impromptu processions of walkers, all heading the same direction, spread out along roads that should have been full of traffic, but were eerily empty. Just people, walking, breath visible in the cold air, nobody talking much because you needed your breath for the effort. Children walking to school were a common sight. Primary school kids who normally caught the bus now walking 2 or 3 miles with their parents or older siblings. Some schools sent teachers out to meet groups of children at certain points, creating unofficial walking buses of 30 or 40 kids being shepherded through the snow. The children thought it was an adventure at first, until they realized how cold and wet and tired they'd be by the time they arrived. If you lived through it, you'll remember how your legs burned after the first mile, how your clothes got soaked through even when the snow wasn't falling that heavily, just from brushing against drifts and walking through slush, how your hands went numb even in gloves, how your face felt frozen, how the walk that should have been 45 minutes stretched to 2 hours because the conditions were so difficult. The really treacherous parts were the hills. Britain's full of hills, and bus routes cleverly navigate them, taking gradual inclines, choosing the easiest paths. But when you're walking, you don't have that luxury. You're following the road, and if the road goes straight up a steep hill covered in ice and compacted snow, that's what you're climbing. People would slip, fall, grab onto walls or railings, help each other up. It was exhausting, dangerous work. Some gave up. You'd see them sheltering in shop doorways, in bus shelters ironically, waiting for something that wasn't coming, hoping conditions would improve. The smart ones turned around and went home, accepting they couldn't make it. But most people kept going because the alternative was losing a day's pay, or letting down your colleagues, or leaving your class without a teacher. Please subscribe to the channel to keep these stories alive. The solidarity was remarkable though. Strangers would help strangers. If someone fell, 3 people would stop to help them up. If someone looked distressed or exhausted, others would check they were all right, walk with them for a bit. Cars that were still running would sometimes stop and offer lifts to complete strangers. Cramming 5 or 6 people into vehicles meant for 4. Shop owners would open early, let people warm up inside, make tea, not charging anything, just helping people survive the journey. The arrival at work or school was a strange mixture of triumph and exhaustion. You'd made it, through conditions that were genuinely difficult, and there was a certain pride in that. But you were also soaked, freezing, exhausted before your day had even started. Offices and factories would have half their staff missing, the ones who'd made it sharing stories of their journeys, comparing routes, discussing who'd had it worst. And then, around 4 or 5 p.m, you'd realise with growing dread that you had to do it all again. The journey home, the same distance, the same conditions, probably worse now because you were already tired and the snow had been falling all day, the buses still weren't running. Maybe they'd resume tomorrow, maybe not. Nobody knew. So you'd wrap your scarf tighter, put your head down and start walking. The evening walks were harder. It was getting dark, streetlights provided some illumination but not enough, and the cold felt more intense somehow. You were tired from working all day plus the morning's walk. Your clothes were still damp from earlier. Everything hurt. But you walked anyway, because what choice did you have? Some people developed strategies. They'd change into spare shoes at work, keeping their wet ones to dry overnight. They'd bring flasks of tea to warm themselves mid-journey. They'd organise walking groups, colleagues who lived in the same direction setting out together, the company making it slightly less miserable. Some people invested in proper walking boots, though many couldn't afford them, and just made do with their ordinary shoes getting ruined. The bus crews themselves often felt terrible about it. Drivers and conductors who lived locally would sometimes make unofficial attempts to run services on their own initiative, getting their buses out and trying routes. But it rarely worked. The vehicles just weren't equipped. They'd get stuck, cause more problems, and have to be abandoned or towed. The system simply wasn't designed for snow. If you remember those walks, share your story in the comments. How far did you walk? What was your route like? This went on for days sometimes, a week or more if the snow persisted. People would develop routines, know exactly how long the walk took, where the worst parts were, where you could stop for a brief rest. Some actually got fitter from all the walking, though they'd never admit to enjoying it. It was just something you endured, like so many other things in 1970s Britain. The buses would eventually return, usually with little fanfare. A gritting lorry would clear the main routes, the snow would ease, and one morning you'd arrive at your stop to find the familiar sight of your bus pulling up, right on time, as if nothing had ever happened. The relief was immense. Climbing aboard, paying your fare, sitting down in a seat instead of walking miles through snow felt like luxury, but the memory stayed with you. That realization of how dependent you were on a system that could vanish overnight, how vulnerable you were when weather disrupted things that you took completely for granted, how far you could actually walk when you had no choice, further than you'd ever thought possible, day after day, through conditions that would make modern Britain close down entirely. Today, when snow is forecast, everything stops preemptively. Schools close at the first flake. Offices tell people to work from home. Public transport announces cancellations before the snow even arrives. And maybe that's sensible, maybe we've learned to be cautious. But something's been lost too. That resilience, that ability to just get on with it, to walk however far you needed to go because staying home wasn't an option. British buses in the 1970s couldn't handle snow, that's true. They'd slide, stick, fail. The system was fragile in ways that seem ridiculous now. But British people could handle it. They'd walk 5 miles to work through a blizzard, do their shift, then walk 5 miles home again, and be back the next day to do it all over again. Not because they were heroes, not because they were special, just because that's what you did. That's what life demanded. The walks weren't pleasant. They were cold, exhausting, sometimes dangerous. Your feet would be soaked, your legs would ache, you'd arrive home desperate for warmth and rest. But you survived them. Everyone did. It was just another hardship in an era full of hardships, another thing you endured because you had no choice, another memory of when Britain worked differently, when weather could stop the buses, but couldn't stop the people who depended on them. Share your memories of those winter walks, subscribe to keep these stories of British resilience alive, and remember, when a few inches of snow meant miles of walking, frozen feet, and the certain knowledge that tomorrow you'd probably have to do it all again. It wasn't glamorous, it was exhausting, but it was ours, and somehow we got through it.